Rethinking Impact Investing, a meaningful conversation brought to you by Bay Bridge Ventures, a new way to look at ESG investment. At this event, we are in the company of some very incredible friends, entrepreneurs and philanthropists, and we are grateful that you would all make time this evening to focus on us, or with us, on such an important topic. My name is Nick Smoot. I'm the founder of Innovation Collective, a nationwide movement that is turning whole communities into inclusive incubators. While working with senior citizens, refugees, youth, and members of First Nations, we have seen a major shift happening in how humans are being empowered and flourishing in ways that add incredible value to the world and their local communities. Yet, we still have a long way to go to repair capitalism and how we ethically create and distribute value. Tonight, our world is hurting. Communally, politically, environmentally, and educationally, we are in troubling times. It is time for action at larger scale, and tonight will be an evening of conversations with thought leaders and industry-shaping investors who have spent decades pushing a very important mission forward. How do we create a better model that harmonizes capitalism? It is important to note that each person on this panel is either an investor, advisor, collaborator of BBV, and the new model they are pioneering to accelerate the change we all know is so badly needed. Now let's introduce you to this amazing panel we have before we get into the content of our discussion. Most of you probably know who they all are at this point, but we are very, very, very looking forward to explaining who they are. First, we'll begin with Freda Caper-Klein. She has been a thought-leading activist and pioneer in the field of organizational culture, equal rights, and diversity for more than 40 years. As a founding partner in Caper Capital, she has continued to shape the world with thoughtful investments in pre-seed and seed stage tech startups that create positive social impact by closing gaps of access, opportunity, or outcome for low-income communities and communities of color. In 2020, she was named the Alumna of the Year by the Cal Alumni Association of UC Berkeley. It is an honor to have you with us, Freda.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Next, we have Morel Evans. He is the Vice President of SoftBank Group International and a member of the Opportunity Fund team. Morel not only is doing his part to close the gap for others, but he has walked that journey. Here's a quote from a post he wrote about his personal journey. "My background certainly separates me from the typical people you see in tech or investing. My father was a heroin user who died of HIV/AIDS when I was a small child. My late stepfather was an alcoholic who once in a drunken fight with my mother shot a gun at her, barely missing. I remember trying to protect my mom by fighting him off and running to check on my little brother when he fired." Morel then went on to be recruited as a player on University of Michigan's top-ranked football team before starting a career in technology at IBM. Next up is Ann Simpson. Ann has been a leader in ESG and climate change reform for more than 30 years, including the last 11 at CalPERS, the largest U.S. pension fund. Will fight on climate change by Time Magazine and one of the 100 most influential women in U.S. finance by Barron's. She is a founding board member of Climate Action 100, which represents 41 trillion in assets, a member of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, and the UN Secretary General's Global Investors for Sustainable Development. And lastly, we have Andrew Karsh. Andrew is the managing partner at Bay Bridge Ventures and has spent the last 20 years managing investments for the world's largest institutional investors, including CalPERS. During that time, he also spent 10 years in investment banking, advising CEOs of Fortune 500 technology companies globally. Andrew is an active investor in disruptive technology companies across sectors and was also founding advisor of the largest tech nonprofit accelerator, Fast Forward, which has helped more than 63 million people since 2013. Very grateful to have all of you on with us. Additionally, you'll see two other individuals who are helping moderate this from the background, and I appreciate their presence as well. We're going to start the interview with Freda. Now, Freda, we have two key questions that we want to ask you. And most people who are on this know who you are. And we're excited to have you here. And one of the things I want to touch on is how mainstream culture didn't understand the true value of inclusion and equitable capitalism. Why did you understand that for so long when no one else did?
Well, as you just said in my introduction, I went to Berkeley. So um, uh, no, I consider my origins to be multifaceted, including being very much an activist and being a researcher. And both of those lead one to ask a lot of questions. So it's kind of ironic that here we are, what is it, the 50th anniversary of Milton Friedman? And I think he was wrong. And I think I'm saying that the business of companies is to make a profit. And I think that there's an enormous trail of damage and human destruction from following that philosophy to its logical conclusion. And I think what this panel is about is saying, no, greed only investing is destructive. It's not helpful to anyone. And that every business has an impact. Some are positive, some are negative, some are mixed, and that we really ought to be taking a broad and nuanced view of what the impact of businesses are on communities, on their employees, on the planet, in every aspect, not just this quarter's earnings.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful perspective. And I love your comment about growing up in the Berkeley community. I have a grandmother that has been very involved in that space for a long time, and her sister. And I think it's an interesting petri dish of curiosity and experimentation to build a better world in the Berkeley world.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for your contributions there. And through Caper Capital and the Caper Foundation, which you're a founding member of, you've been investing in underrepresented founders for over a decade now. Mm-hmm. Again, this is not something that a lot of people were paying attention to a decade ago, but considering the investment community is now just catching up to your views, what role do you see institutionally sized venture funds playing in changing this better future? What obligation, what role should they be playing?
Well, I think it's an enormous and important role for institutional investors, for LPs, to continue to drive change. So in addition to having invested, we've been 100% gap closing impact investing since 2011. So every tech startup we invest in, the core business, we're not talking about a Tom Shoe model where you can decide to give something away or not. We're talking about baked into the business model of the tech startup. We don't write a check unless the core business closes gaps of access or opportunity or outcome for communities of color and or low income communities. Mm-hmm. Quite a while ago, many people were worried, oh, we're not going to have deal flow, blah, blah, blah. Looking at for the first time, we released our results from 2011 through the end of 2017. That's our impact report that we put out a year ago, May of 2019. You can download it off of the caporcapital.com website. We have top quartile financial returns. We beat both PitchBook and Cambridge Associates with 60% underrepresented founders and 100% gap closing businesses. So all of this nonsense about impact investing or diversity investing is concessionary. Nope. Top quartile returns with both of those lenses.
That's incredible. Do you mind if I ask a question in specifics to that? I think it's fascinating because many other people have started throwing money at the problem and they're not experiencing those returns. What mistake do you see them making consistently? Because I know people who are listening to this are looking for the right model, and it sounds like, in many ways, you guys have figured that code.
Well, what we were looking at, I sort of think of it as a Venn diagram between those who have a diversity focus and those who have an impact focus. And ours is really the overlap of those. So we will invest in a business, not just because of the demographic of the founder, but because of the demographics of the community that it impacts. And so often that means that we have a Black or brown founder, because what we find is that those lived experiences and I can't wait to hear from Meryl. Those lived experiences generate really powerful ideas for new businesses. And that's what we keep seeing. And so it is who we welcome at the table as entrepreneurs, who we welcome at the table as part of our investment team makes an enormous difference in our ability to understand real problems and real solutions.
Yeah, I think that's incredible, because I think a lot of times people will put the money out there just looking to find a home, to feel like they're doing their part, quote unquote. And I think that Venn diagram example is not only beautiful, but it is truly that opportunity to do good and do well while empowering the whole world, moving the needle forward. So I really appreciate that insight. And, you know, we're going to jump for sake of time, and we have some time for questions at the end, but I want to say thank you so much. And could we bring Morel on, and it's a chance to hear from him and his story for a little bit. As Morel's coming back on. Hello, sir. How are you?
How's it going, everyone?
Good. You know, you have, as I read in your bio, an amazing and non-traditional background compared to most people in venture capital, without any question. And your journey has been one of many ups and downs that have demonstrated your ability to succeed through challenges. What obstacles have you had to overcome on your journey, not only in playing elite football and taking care of your family, but now becoming, you know, a rising star in the world of venture capital? Explain some of that journey, because I think Freda nailed it. Is you've lived a path that many don't.
Right. Well, first, I'd like to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to cherish this moment. Now, I want to first say it took a lot of courage, right, to try to exceed expectations and also try to be an example, right? So I think once, in my goal, you know, in our community, it's very easy for me to say I wanted to play pro football, right? Because that was my goal. But to say I wanted to be a founder of a technology company to take it public, or to say I wanted to, you know, work at a top venture capital company, and it wasn't, you know, something that my parents or my surroundings kind of preached to me. So what it took is, you know, me to do a lot of homework, right? And also to be okay with being different and being an anomaly. So many cases, I feared being an anomaly, and I was always scared. And most recently, about a month ago, I published a Medium to talk about being a non-traditional hire and embracing that, right? And not being scared, right? So my mother, she did a great job of letting me know that I can achieve anything, right? If I put my mind to it. In addition, using, you know, sports as just a metaphor, and using the characteristics and attributes that sports gave me, and just pivoting and focusing on business. So one of my great mentors, a guy named Tom McKinnon, who's the CEO of Okta, he told me usually 80% of a job is the same. And that 20% is just expertise in a specialty that you just need to focus on, right? And if I can, you know, dedicate my time to focus on that 20% and really in a practical, methodical way, I could exceed expectations.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned that you didn't fit like a lot of the profile of the community which you came from, and you sharing this Medium post, trying to normalize a level of comfort for people. Not only do I see that as something that's very bold and necessary, but it'd be wonderful if we could live in a world where it was just, you know, the norm to chase your dreams and feel supported. And I commend you for helping lead that charge for many.
Of course.
You know, and based on your experience in Virginia and now at the largest venture capital fund in the world, why do you see investment into diverse founders as an important and overlooked opportunity? Because Freda mentioned it, that they're seeing, you know, ridiculous returns and still doing good in the world, which is, I mean, that's the golden goose that everyone's looking for right now. And she's been doing it for legacy for a long time. And, you know, you're at this interesting seat at the table. You know, what is that opportunity in what does it look like to you, and how do you kind of navigate that in the firm you're in?
So I think the first thing first, Fredo made a great point. This is a fiduciary duty, right? This isn't for charity, right? We're not trying to create a white water fountain and a black water fountain, right? We're trying to centralize water across to every founder, right? I hope that's a contextual example that you can kind of visually see. This isn't for charity. We think some of the founders that we go and hunt are, one day companies that will have a massive return and a great multiple, right? So I've been very lucky. And Marcelo spinning this off SoftBank Opportunity Fund, which is the largest of its kind. But to take a step back, Kapor Capital has already proved that this is a model that can be successful and deliver returns. And also, again, this is a fiduciary duty to the limited partners, right? She said they released the impact report, I think 2011 to 2017, which granularly shows, and also I think they compared the IRR to different firms to say, hey, we can do this, right? So don't make excuses and say, because we're so niche focused, we can't deliver the same, returns as a agnostic, I should say, race or non-impact fund, right? This is something that will become a mandate, will become a responsibility. The institutions and endowments will one day say, hey, this is something that we want to set in our terms if we commit to your fund, and we need you guys to have a plan. And what funds like Kapor Capital, they have already solved this. And I'm just lucky enough to be at SoftBank and try to take advantage of this iconic moment.
Yeah, and to that point, I think a lot of times people view, hitting their metrics as if it's something to just look good. And I love the fact that you're pioneering that in this space, in the world's largest fund of its kind. The impact that could have is incredible. Personal question, if you may ask another one about Virginia.
Sure.
How do you view, because with Innovation Collective, we're all across the country in small towns helping percolate authentic, inclusive community and deal flow. Are you starting to imagine a day where here's how SoftBank can work with Virginia? I know you're not geographically confined, but how does that run through your mind, knowing there's my hometown and my friends, and now I'm over here?
Well, I think first you think about the characteristics of the founders would just be different, right? The adoption rate for the founders would just be different because they may not have the kind of technical acumen as a CEO or founder from, San Francisco. So are you personalizing your pitch? Are you personalizing your hunting mission? Are you putting specific curriculum and I should say educational material to be able to fish new talent? And also just understanding the market, right? Understanding that, for example, Virginia is a heavy manufacturing state, right? It's a commonwealth.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, the legal regulations are much different. So just understanding the different trends and being able to predict the different trends, right? So maybe, this technology company may adopt quicker, in Virginia than it would in California. And understanding that also just the overall, regulations, right? And the characteristics and the day-to-day customers, right? Let the customers direct you to new products.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for the role you're playing at SoftBank. And thank you so much. I think all of us, as we're trying to work with different, people who sometimes feel like they're stuck. You are a shining example of someone who says, no, I'm not stuck. I'm just getting started. And I can't wait to see the impact you continue to have on the world. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think it's a responsibility I have and it's a privilege.
Absolutely. Thank you. And now we'll jump over to Anne for sake of time and keep going with some of the questions. Hello, Anne. How are you? We're going to take Anne off mute. Almost there. We're there.
Hello.
Hello, hello. It is a pleasure to have you with us.
No, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, it's an interesting time with the West Coast on fire and the role you play. I mean, you definitely see the world of environmental, social, and governmental through a different lens than most. And I know we mentioned earlier, but the world is hurting right now. And to have someone like you who's in such a role of leadership, it's an honor to hear your thoughts on this. So thank you for the work you've done. It's got to be a difficult time.
No,
So,
thanks, Nick. That's very kind and overly generous.
no, it's accurate. I think, at least from my perspective, many people don't understand the impact of what's happening in the world and how we can right the ship. And a lot of it is financial mechanisms and tools. And it's great to see people like you leading that way. So when we see that ESG is it's the hot word of the week in corporate America, it seems like right now, where everyone's
hot
saying,
and smoky, right?
Yeah. Look at you, a little ironic and true. It's hot and smoky. But as everyone in corporate America is saying, this is the new thing they need to focus on. You've been a leader in this space for the last 30 years. And much like Freda, who's been steady hand at the wheel going onward we go. And here you are 30 years into this. And you've been recognized as one of the most influential women in finance. Why
Dangerous.
is ESG, you're dangerous, a dangerous woman in finance.
Dangerous title.
It is. And I want to know why is ESG at the core of you? Like, where did that come from? Because some people, it's not there. They just say, well, someone else will deal with it. Why for you is that important?
Well, that's sort of interesting. There's probably a personal answer to that. And, I think we're all creature of our own upbringing. And, I came from a very big family. I was one of 6 kids. And my mum had 6 kids under the age of 10, as she's suddenly on her own to bring up. And I didn't come from a wealthy background, but I was in a situation, where I ended up getting educated by nuns. So I'm sure that the idea that purpose is given to you through religion, I think that was very much the way I started off. But, the idea that you, particularly as a young girl, that you were going to finance, that you would even work, other than in something menial, to allow you to look after children and take care of your husband and all of that. This was all very odd. So, my entry into really thinking about what would I do, what would I be when I grew up, really came because I had an opportunity to go to university. And in Britain, where I'm from, as you can probably tell, I'm not American. Yeah, you picked that up, right?
I did. I'm a smart one.
There were, in those days, Oxford and Cambridge, 2 universities you've probably, you've heard of, would have an entrance exam. And when I left school, my family thought education was a waste of time, and you should get married, get a job, preferably, both, start knocking out a few kids. That's what life is all about. But I did I left school and I had a job working in a pub, and I applied to Oxford through the entrance exam. And my good luck was that I got a place. However, at that point, most of the colleges at Oxford wouldn't accept women. I mean, that was a legal thing. Just no.
Wow.
Computers, so I think there were 5 out of the 30-odd colleges that would accept women. So I think, coming from a situation with a single parent and a lot of brothers and sisters, and also going into this very elite educational environment, set me up with some view of the world. And then, I think what got me interested in finance was this question of if you have some question about who gets what, why, when, how, you're basically talking about economics. And it's a question of power. And we think about power as being something that goes on and gets negotiated in the political arena, or maybe in a wrestling ring, I don't know. But with finance, what you're really talking about is a tremendously powerful force for good and for ill. And the other thing which I think led me into the pension fund investment side of all of this, which is sort of where I squared the circle for myself on morals and money, is that a pension fund is essentially the collective savings of working people, and like the CalPERS, with a social purpose. So what's the day job of CalPERS is to take the money that we collect from nearly 2 million public servants in public workers. I say public servants. I'm a civil servant. That means you don't sweat. But those people's money gets invested, and we pay out about $25 billion a year in benefits. That's money that pays the rent, puts food on the table, and we're investing not just for people in elite positions like judges and university professors. We're investing for janitors, for firefighters, for the people who work at the DMV, people who are in health, in the health industry, and so forth. So this idea of social provision in finance is an essential way of thinking about this. So, you know, when I think about this little bit of the acronym that's been colonized, you know, ESG, I don't like that terminology at all. Because it's not really something separate from the financial system. And the starting point is to understand that this wealth that we have, this financial wealth, belongs to the common people. So the concept of the commonwealth is very, very important. The commonwealth, and our task, if we care about humanity in very simple terms, is to get the commonwealth harnessed to the common good. And that might be through a pension fund, it might be through impact investing, shareholder activism, green bonds. There's an absolute, this is a sort of the renaissance in terms of finance at the moment, because new ideas, new thinking, there's such a proliferation of creativity. So we've got this massive human challenges and needs and wants still to be tackled. And we have a huge amount of money in the system, which happens in the post-war period to mostly represent working people's money. So what we're really talking about is lining up the money with the needs and wants of the people who this money ultimately belongs to. So, you know, there's plenty to do, but the timing, I think, is right for new initiatives.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And I like the idea of the commonwealth for the common good. I think that's a very beautiful statement that I think it represents the hope of the people, and to know that you do have your hand at that wheel and you're doing your best to guide it. I'm grateful, and I know we've seen too often the impact of poorly managed capitalism and how it damages and hurts so many. When you are at this, you know, the largest U.S. pension fund, you've been there for 11 years. What is this balance that you've seen, or what kind of challenges are there in terms of investment dollars, making the impact everyone hopes for, kind of the commonwealth for the common good?
Yeah.
But also, you know, there's this, we want that impact in climate and social inclusion and governance, yet there's still the required targets, because, you know, if we just do heavy research and we can't pay the janitor his money, then he kind of goes, oh, thank you, but now I lost my house. You know, what are those challenges that you see of balancing those right now?
No, it's really, there's been an assumption, maybe in a way because ESG took these letters in from the alphabet and talked about this as, I think initially as though this was something on top of your financial responsibilities. And it's not, it underpins your financial responsibilities. So what we did at CalPERS was go back to the drawing board after the last financial crisis to say, well, when we think about our job as an investor, what does that really mean? And we wrote into our a new set of investment beliefs that for long-term value creation, out of which we pay pensions and healthcare for these nearly 2 million people and their dependents, in order to make those financial returns, it's not just financial capital that matters. We said human capital and also physical capital, these three forms of capital, we need to see ourselves as stewards of all three. So we didn't run under the ESG flag, but going really back to basics about where does value come from? And if money does not grow on trees, and we've actually got to create value in the portfolio. And for us, that's very important, not just because we pay nearly 60 cents on the dollar for every dollar we pay out in pension and health comes from investments, but also CalPERS is underfunded. That means we don't have enough in the kitty to pay all the liabilities that we've got. So we have a very aggressive rate of return. It's 7% is the so-called discount rate. So we can't afford to not be focused on the financial returns. At the same time, we've got to understand where value comes from. So if we start thinking about human capital, then we have to say, okay, well, if we really believe that, what is CalPERS going to be doing by way of considering diversity and inclusion, for example? So we've had a major project with boards of companies around diversity on boards. We also have policies in our real assets portfolio on us being responsible contractors. That means where we've got a majority position in a holding, which is usually the case in all property and infrastructure that we invest in, that we require those managers to report into us on health and safety, staying neutral if there's a union drive going on, that kind of thing. No kneecapping and sacking and intimidation of union organizers. It's really important. Pay, conditions, benefits, and the bidding out of those contracts to unionized firms so they don't get disadvantaged in the process. So whenever, wherever, however we allocate capital, these issues about human capital and as you just said, Nick, on climate change. I mean, we're at the point now where even those who question the science and maybe I'm not sure what they believe in instead. Maybe they believe in magic. If you don't believe in science, magic's your alternative, right? But anyway, even if you believe in magic, the seriousness of the climate change means that now what we're doing is not just making arguments from our insight and deductive logic, if you like. We're able to start modeling really what's happening to the risk in our portfolio. So we've just done a project with Woods Hole Meteorological Center to map what we're calling zip code risk. In other words, the assets that we have in our portfolio, we can start to layer on top of them the meteorological projections so that we can see, I mean, we don't need evidence in California, you know, and you can't breathe or see because of the wildfire smoke. You're not looking for academic paper to tell you there's a problem. But what we've got to be able to do is articulate all of these issues in a way that the financial markets can understand. Because if we're going to make change, we've got to move at scale. And that really is, you know, you mentioned in the introduction, the logic behind CalPERS convening Climate Action 100 Plus, where we've got this alliance of more than $40 trillion. And what we're focusing on is the biggest emitters in our portfolio. And these companies, these 100 companies, if they were a country, they would be the third largest source of emissions in the world. So you get China number one, US number two, and then only 100 companies spewing out the third largest source of global emissions. The good news is pension funds like CalPERS are the owners of those companies. So this issue about stewardship and the commonwealth and the common good isn't just about allocating to venture capital and to private equity. It's right across our asset classes. And we have to be willing to be held accountable as the owners of these companies and make sure that we're directing strategy in a way that means we're aligned on sustainability. That ultimately is a really tough job over the short term versus the long term, because too often companies feel the hot breath of quarterly earnings on their neck and they're not able to make these long-term commitments that they need to. We had a great example in Texas with NRG, a big utility you all know well, you've heard of, I'm sure. They made a beautiful 25-year transition plan with many investors like us supporting them and to retrain the workforce, to make sure that the workforce involved in the coal and the fossil fuel end ended up with the jobs in the renewables, the new model of the company. But then a hedge fund jumped in, and the plan was broken up and everything was sold and the share price went up temporarily. So unless we break through this addiction to short term. The long term is not an accumulation of the short term. There are choices to be made now that will affect our ability to survive and to thrive and to have inclusive prosperity. So, one of the big things I think for the investment community is, how do you fix your courage to the sticking post? Is that Lady Macbeth? That's a bit dark. But anyway, fix your courage to the sticking post in order that you can ride out this short-term pressure, because that's the only way that we're going to get some of these major challenges dealt with.
I love that, because I think, we do see short-term behavior so often because it's, in many ways, it's human nature. We want that instant gratification, and to understand, $41 trillion, the decisions that can be made to structure and to cause, if you'd like the capital, you must behave in these manners and set the new rules and the new regulations. It's not an easy task, but I do believe, there's a question from someone that will have everyone maybe answer at the end. But I think that's such a crucial piece to righting the bad behavior. And I agree. I agree with that. Andrew, we're going to bring on Andrew now for a few more questions, and I think we'll bring back on the panelists to answer a question, and then jump into some of the structure of BBV and the innovative approach to trying to create this long-term sustainable loop. But welcome, Andrew. So, you've spent the last 20 plus years managing investments for the largest institutions in the world. And during that time, you've also developed the largest tech nonprofit startup accelerator. Many wouldn't see those two focuses on parallel paths. Why do you, and how does that happen, that you're wearing one hat by day, and then throwing on another hat over here by night in the nonprofit and the largest funds in the world? Explain that dichotomy.
Yeah, no, that's great, Nick. I really appreciate the question. And it's not that I'm suddenly changing my outfit and turning into Superman in a phone booth and putting on the good hat. But, it's something that I've always thought about, even, when I first went into finance, thinking about capitalism, and, as Anne rightfully mentioned, capital as a tool. It was always about, how do you create capital to be used for the right purposes, right? How do you make sure that the people you're helping, or the companies you're helping, or the organizations you're investing for, are able to meet their needs? But then also, how, even for individuals, obviously, a lot of ultra high net worth families are really focused on, how do we use the returns that we're generating from our investment side, and use that for philanthropic purposes. And so, when I got lucky enough to move to California about 9 years ago, I was recruited to come out here and build a direct investment pool for CalPERS. It was really about, two things, right? One is, how do we have this large pool of capital and use it in a way that, is helping the 2 million people underneath it, but also, how do we take these tools that have been used by corporations and families for a long time and really utilize that to help sort of the common good. And so, one of the things, just coincidentally, when I moved out here, suddenly, not being on the private side, I wasn't working 80 hours a week, and, got to see my kids for dinner. And I said, what else could I do? What else could I be doing with my time to add value, right? So, obviously there's one part to do it on the capital side, and you hope the money goes to the right places. Then the other question was really about, how do you directly influence the opportunities that are being created through philanthropic capital? And so, coincidentally, I guess it was about 8 years ago now, I went to the first ever nonprofit board directors event held at Stanford. They've got a social innovation review group. Coincidentally, there were 20 people there, happened to sit next to somebody who had just sold their company, and we started brainstorming about, how else can we leverage capital and technology to really make some significant change in the world. And, at that point, it was sort of a pipe dream, similar to some of the other stories that we've heard before. And, it turned out to be, an amazing opportunity. So we created this group called Fast Forward. That's really like any other tech accelerator, whether it's a Y Combinator or groups like that. But it was really focused on using technology as a tool to make scalable change, right? And so, just even for example, the first year, we had a group that was 3 coders who created an app to get unused food from sporting events and corporate functions. And effectively, those 3 people on an app, the first year happened to be the Super Bowl in San Francisco, fed 1 million meals. And so it was really sort of a light bulb going off for a lot of us, who are thinking about how do you create scalable change and how do you even, it sounds sort of oxymoronic, but how do you disrupt philanthropy in a way that you're really kind of creating a data-centric change. So people say, okay, for every dollar I put in, how do I know what's actually happening? But B, sort of creating this scalable and international model that, the same way SaaS has sort of taken over the world, so to speak, this tech nonprofit model, has really been an amazing tool for us to create scalable change across, every mission from, as I mentioned, feeding the homeless, assaults on campuses, getting medication to places in India and Africa that never would have gotten it. So it was really sort of an exciting way to use some of the skill sets that I've built to make this scalable change. And the fact that we've helped now 63 million people just through that one program, has really been amazing. Plus, the other gratification is now, lots of other tech companies and accelerators are trying to emulate that model to really make significant change.
That's fantastic. It's fun how each of the panelists have had this journey that everyone has found their true north and has held on and has found ways to express it in meaningful ways that create significant impact. And now you've been in both the institutional and the nonprofit world, and through that and kind of holding on to your true north and not losing yourself to the world of just returns. You've now decided that you have a model that you believe will give the returns and the impact that the world's been begging for. And I mentioned earlier, all the folks who are on this panel, they're supporters of what this is. They're either investors, advisors, or collaborators alongside of you, along with myself and Innovation Collective. Tell us a little bit about Bay Bridge Ventures and why it's different. There was a question asked by somebody that I want to bring more of the panelists on after, but I want to frame it with this as well. The question was, look, the person said, we started a SOCAP gathering, and we had hoped for, billions and billions and, potentially trillions of dollars to go rushing into this do good, do well market. And the question was, what's it going to take? Like, what's it, just kind of ripping the hair out feeling that a lot of family offices and other people feel like, what's it going to take to get the returns, to really drive that do good, do well? And I think with Bay Bridge, that's one of those pieces that, you're throwing one more step that the world hasn't been willing to take yet. So talk a little bit about Bay Bridge Ventures.
Yeah, no, that's great, Nick. I appreciate that. I mean, because the other thing is too, when I think about where we are now in the, whether it's impact or whether it's ESG or whatever you want to call it space, I mean, there's really a gap and an opportunity, which is, 10 years ago, there were a lot of investors that put money into funds that said, okay, we're an impact fund, we're going to invest in these specific companies. And some of them worked out, some of them didn't. But, a lot of them around deep tech focuses around solar panels and wind farms and things like that. And so, I think because of that, sort of the impact area, quote unquote, kind of got a bad name with institutional investors. And so ironically, as Anne alluded to, over the last, 12 months, but really 2 or 3 years, the focus on ESG has been something that's really been a major driver of change, both, at the board level, as well as the investment level for lots of pensions, endowments, and foundations around the world. They all go to Davos and talk about the importance of, climate change, and they all go to the Paris Climate Summit. And there really hasn't been a model that really allows the direct impact that people are looking for, right? And so, if they're looking at things that are, titled ESG and it's in the ballpark, but, it's slightly different, really it was about how do I use the same model and this tool of this catalytic capital to create something that sort of threads the needle, which is, how do you generate top tier returns, but also generate impact? Because, all these organizations, whether it's US pension funds, whether it's, European sovereign wealth funds, but even for families, right? I mean, the latest research is showing that the next generation of high net worth families is really looked at, hey, that's great that our parents gave away philanthropic dollars, they got involved one way, but the next generation is really about how do we make significant change, but also make a profit? And so we've created this unique model where a sort of an institutional size fund, which is critical because most of the LPs that we're talking to, write minimum $20 million checks. And so they were looking for something that's, big, but also from my perspective, the scalable change and all the things that Freda, Morel, and Anne have talked about are critical. And the larger we can get the strategy, the more impact that happens. And so effectively, the model works almost like a Robin Hood effect, but as opposed to saying, hey, we hope that we're generating capital and it's going to make a difference. Here we're saying 100% it's going to make a difference, right? It's not about hoping, but effectively the way we're doing that is setting up this Baybridge Ventures as a institutionally sized multi-stage venture fund, seed to Series C, but it's really about taking 50% of our carry from the GPs, so the investors who are running this, and putting that into a philanthropic pool, which will then be granted by our anchor investors and our LP investors towards philanthropic causes like the ones we're talking about, whether it's social inclusion, whether it's climate change. That way it's not about, we hope things are happening, but we know 100% of the dollars were created in this pool, which we hope will be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, are directly going towards impacting the future and making the world a better place.
Yeah, and that feeds into, a lot of times everyone's been discussing where's the money going to come from to do this deep research that moves the needle. And I'm such a big believer in this model. When you and I met and started talking about this a little over a year ago, because it's abundance mentality. It's not scarcity mentality. It's a belief that you can do good and do well. And it's a belief that there are institutional groups and family offices and endowments that say we want to do this, and giving them the bigger bite of the apple, might we say, to do good with. I think it's an enticing piece that starts to draw people back in. I think before
the one thing I was going to say too is, the neat part about this exercise, and we've been spending about a year and a half, working towards creating this model, is that it also, to your point, brings out other like-minded people, like Freda, like Morel, like Innovation Collective, who are all trying to do the same thing. And it's this collaborative approach that's sort of the rising tide lifts all ships that's really been, I think, so exciting for so many people, who are looking to invest in the fund, because it's not about, give us money and then go away. It's about, we're all going to help this succeed. So if we get to invest in, follow-on investments in some of the amazing companies that Fred is investing in, or if, SoftBank wants to invest in companies that we're investing in, and clearly Innovation Collective is creating this localized hub for people that, are from non-traditional backgrounds to succeed in this environment.
Right. Andrew, is it fine if we bring back on all the panelists to answer kind of one final question, and then we'll shift into more of the metrics and kind of the structure of the fund that you wanted to chat about as well?
Yeah.
You good with?
I love that.
Yeah. Could you bring them back on, Chris, for the different panelists? All right. I think Morel might be coming in as well. What I wanted to do, I saw, a fun comment in the thread, a few of them that were great. One mentioned that, look, it's going to take mavericks to change this world. And I would have to say, when I getting to know the folks here, definitely mavericks. And often, when we're doing our work across the country and around the world, we like to refer to them as the co-conspirators of good. It's this group that wants to change the world and do well at the same time. Kind of maybe in a closing question, in kind of closing comments for each person, there seemed to be this question that was posed that was, what's it going to take? Like just truly, what, like almost that exasperation, what will it take to get trillions of dollars to run to this channel? And, is there a comment that you would like to make to people in parting that, hopefully in 12 months from now, maybe isn't just some aspirational comment, but it's one that says, in the next 12 months, do this. This is your part to person X who's on this call to help it move it to that next step. Morel, you're off mute. I'm going to go with you first, my friend, if you're okay with that. What is the parting thing you'd like to say, or, to answer that question? What is this going to take to get trillions of dollars flowing this way?
So I remember a quote, and it said, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself, right? And I think it should say, so internally, organizations, institutions, funds, firms, these hyper-growth companies, they have to change first. Right? You have to internally adjust and assess the personnel. And then from there, you can start to change, your customers, right? Then you start to change your thesis, right? So for example, you can't be a fund or a firm who talks about investing or impacting or philanthropy and you don't actually own that on a day-to-day basis, right? That's just something you do for public, or you see firms do it. Obviously, when the George Floyd stuff happened, you see a lot of PR press, and you see people not putting capital to their actual actions. They're just talking. So until you actually change internally, then your actions should be able to be externally also impacted.
I love that. It's put the money and the time where it belongs. Thank you for that.
Of course.
And do you have anything that you'd like to say in parting, just for folks who are on here that hopefully advances them forward? I know you're on mute still. I want to let you know that before we start. As people are pulling out the hair going, we want to see a better world. What will it take, Anne? Tell us the secrets.
Well, I genuinely see the force of finance, but what's missing is a sense of common ownership. We think that money is something that gets moved around on Wall Street or the City of London, or is that guy on the Monopoly board with the top hat and the monocle, right? That's the capitalist. Well, it's not. The capital in the system has come from the savings, the hard work of communities around the world. And what we're talking about, it's a bit like democracy, is the political system's got to reflect the needs of the big, wider community. And it's exactly the same with the economic system. And finance can be the irresistible force to the immovable object. So I like very much what Meryl said, but the bit that's missing is opposition, because we have to accept that these are contested issues. And we've got to be willing to not only be creative and innovative, but rebuild a sense of community that can actually move through some of the opposition. I mean, because this is actually extremely tough stuff. And if you're not intentional and deliberate and organized, you just will not get the change. So, it's educate, agitate, and organize, as the person we all know once said rightly, and this is just as true for finance.
I love it. I feel like we might have a handful of the Mavericks on this call right now that are the rebel rousers. And I will say, you mentioned something about capital and community and that shared effort. One of the things for me is, I recall I'm a part of the Milken Institute as one of their young leaders, and as a young man, in my early 20s, I went to the conference when the Occupy movement was happening. And that was one of the first times in my whole life. I grew up in small town America, and I'm in big city after I'd sold a few startups. And, I'm there at this conference with people in suits and ties, and that wasn't me. I'm the entrepreneur. And there's all the big wigs and people bumping shoulders, sipping on cocktails, talking about inclusive prosperity. And as I walk through and I see the people outside protesting, there was this sense of, oh, the world's not okay. And that was one of the first moments for me to realize that it wasn't okay. And it may sound silly, but I was so young and so consumed in just run. And then I came up for air and looked around, and there was a sense of everyone outside felt like it was them, and everyone inside, it was us. But the reality of it is, you nailed it when you said it's community and shared value. No, it's our value together. And I appreciate you mentioning that, because many of us and people outside of us still don't understand that we're all in this together. That smoke is hitting all of us. When someone can't pay their bills, it hurts our whole community. And people act poorly because they can't get things done. So thank you for mentioning the community component. Miss Freda, please. You're on mute still. Share with us your parting words that you think anybody on this call, before we talk a little bit more with Andrew, what will it take to move trillions of dollars in this direction in your mind?
Well, I think each of my co-panelists have pointed out very important steps that need to be taken. I think we are, in the US in particular, we have a huge deficit of empathy. And I'm hoping that we are beginning to build it. I do think one of the things when we discovered that the smoke from the West Coast reached New York, We've got hurricanes battering the Gulf Coast. I do hope that we recognize something that a quote that's attributed sometimes to Dr. Martin Luther King, sometimes to Emma Lazarus, who wrote on the Statue of Liberty base. But whoever said it, maybe both of them said it, none of us are free until all of us are free. And I think that we all need to absorb that message. None of us make it on our own. None of us are self-made. And I think that's one of the most destructive myths, the rugged individualism of America. And we need to think a lot more about on whose shoulders we stand. I think there are some very hopeful signs. One of the things that we hope we did at Capewell Capital is debunk some of the biggest myths about concessionary returns. We see every day we are inspired by talent. Every day we're inspired by people taking lemons and making lemonade, taking barriers and turning them into opportunity. I think some of the things we have in the US, we have changing demographics, and that's a huge plus. It means a whole growing talent, pool of talent as entrepreneurs, as investors. I think it will continue to reshape how we think about ourselves and community in this country. One of the most heartening moments is when I saw a few months ago after the murder of George Floyd, when I saw that the majority of US citizens supported Black Lives Matter. That was a really important moment. And so for those who are participating in this event and they're worried that they're stepping out, the majority supported Black Lives Matter. Those are your customers, those are your clients, those are the people who are looking to you to place their money, and they want values alignment. So I think what we have to do is stop hiding, because there are more of us who share these beliefs than we often understand.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I can't help but just dream about the day that every person who doesn't feel free right now feels empowered, feels like they belong at the table, feels like they have access when they need it to get to that next level, and know they have the support of their neighbor. And it's a group like this, in the roles that they have and coming together to build something meaningful, even like the structure of BBV, that starts to provide that pathway and the hope, for a little Morel that's still back in Virginia that doesn't yet know. And he goes, well, he did it. Maybe I can be me next. So I'm very grateful for everybody. And I know, Andrew, you want to talk a little bit more about some of field some questions and maybe answer some more things around how the LP returns will be redirected into the research and kind of that infinite loop of the circular economy everyone hopes for. Do you want to dive into that right now?
Sure, that's great. Yeah, thanks again to everybody who joined, an amazing group of panelists, and the fantastic thing, Nick, that I've seen, as I alluded to before, is that, often with these things, when they're new and disruptive or different, you kind of feel like you're alone, like lots of entrepreneurs who are sort of, breaking the system and thinking about that. But really, as you put your feelers out, and it takes some time, but, again, the fact that I've, created a relationship with Freda and Mitch Caper, Anne has been amazing, mentor for a long time in the climate change side, and Morel is somebody who, I've had a fantastic relationship with for years. It's sort of like, helping each other succeed has been, the core for this strategy, and everybody working together, is the only way that things are really going to change. But so, in terms of your point, Nick, basically what we've done is we've created this unique model where it's not about, here's our investment money, let us know how it's going. It's really about, inclusion of our investors, inclusion of our anchor investors, inclusion of our LPs, because what we realized is, this isn't 10 or 20 years ago where people wanted to be passive investors. And especially when it comes to causes like ESG and climate change and social governance. And Nick, you're exactly right, which is the last 6 to 8 months have been a game changer in terms of people's personal intent to be activists in the space, the same way institutions have been for a long time. And so, as we sort of create this philanthropic pool, again, as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to help you make investments, we're going to take the money and do what we want with it. This is really about contributing to the cause. So as we take this 50% of the GP carry and put it into a philanthropic pool, the people involved will be, right now we're raising a small $5 million anchor round to sort of get everything launched. We have about half of that covered, from anchor investors. But, it's really about bringing together people that are like-minded, like Freda and like other philanthropists who are directly involved in these missions. And so as opposed to me saying, hey, as the fund manager, we should have discretion over where we're putting capital, it's really about being surrounded by people who are experts in this space. And so whether it's Freda on the social inclusion side, some of our investors on the climate change side, thinking about governance as an important model for companies that we're investing in, but really we're giving not only information flow, but discretion to our anchor investors and then subsequently on the LP side as well. So it's really about having an inclusive rising tides lifts all ship, but also a deep commitment to educating our investors about what we're looking at, what's going on in these causes, and then taking their feedback, since they're going to have discretion on how those philanthropic dollars are being contributed. So it's really, this positive feedback loop of capitalism, returns, and then taking those profits directly and putting it back into the ecosystem.
Well, and from our side with Innovation Collective, I know you and I have spent about a year and a half getting to know each other and talking about, our work. And we're incredibly excited to be a part of Bay Bridge Ventures as an exclusive deal flow platform across the country because, from our side, having a fund with incredible people in the Bay Area that have so much access to other talent and partners really only helps us because our mission, as is we're out there in Ely, Nevada, a city of 1,000 families, hard stop, 1,000 families, literally. And yet our job is to help create this community of curiosity and confidence that they can build the future, help them learn the skills that make them relevant again in the world, help them find the partnerships and the access that can help scale ideas and what they create that they believe is value and beauty. And in that, sometimes, look, probably 80 out of 100 things we're going to hear are great value and beauty, maybe for Ely. But then there's the 20 that we look at and go, wait a second, that might be the one that not only impacts Ely, but it impacts the whole state and the whole West Coast and maybe the whole country, maybe the whole world. And yet that person, people say market forces move them to where the capital is and where the access is. I don't buy that. And so for 8 years, that's what we've been building is this national platform to surface the best and the brightest that are often the overlooked locations and the overlooked people that aren't included in this game. And, we're across the country, proud to be a part of this with our ecosystems incubator, with our boots on the ground teams that we've hired and staff. And, we're honored to be able to be a part of that and to not only help introduce capital into the fund, but hopefully continue to find companies, that are changing the world. And I shared with you one of my favorite stories, getting to see a young founder who was a college dropout that has stumbled across through doing woodwork, a brand new way to create composite manufacturing at the highest speed seen out of a 3D printer. And that's now being used in automobiles and used in manufacturing at scale. This young person, his own family didn't think he had a future. And now he owns all these houses and he's gone on to found multiple companies. It's a great story. So we're grateful to be a part of that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Nick. And I think the neat part too is that it's, sort of breaking down these barriers of capitalism, right? So when I think about the opportunities that, are arising from investing in companies that are coming out of Innovation Collective, companies that are coming out of Caper Capital, companies that are coming out of, other areas of our network, it's really, I think, the first time that we can think about, where capital is being generated and then B, how it's being invested, right? So when I think about some of the institutional LPs I've been speaking with over the last year or so, whether it's in the US or international, a lot of what they're trying to do is figure out how to obviously invest and help their cause, whether it's a the CIO of a children's hospital endowment, or whether it's a university endowment, or whether it's a foundation that's focused on things like foster care. It's really about, they're trying to make the greatest good for their constituents. But on the other hand, there's been this assumption that if you want to do that, you have to take money, give it to a manager who then spends it in Palo Alto, or spends it in New York, or spends it in, some isolated areas. And so really, the opportunity to invest in companies that are coming out of kind of both grassroots America and then, the equivalent internationally is really, the way I think about sort of spreading the opportunity set, similar to what Morel talked about, similar to what Ann talked about, across these different demographics, and really creating the society that we all know it should be, but sort of removing this access to capital that's such a barrier to the growth of so many parts of society now.
Yeah, and from one of the pieces to mirror with that, our work over the 8 years, we've been trying to figure out what will be the model that helps any community that's overlooked be able to rise to the level of which they know they're capable of, and much of that is big metropolises. There's just serendipity due to size, where people are bumping into each other and then they find the capital, or they find the this, the that, and yet there's still a big base that's overlooked. Yet those big metropolises become the celebrated locations. And is there great deal flow there? Absolutely. But also at the same time, do we need to organize a pathway, that lets people rise and find their spot and move through the process to be prepared for that, their role, or to be able to pursue a big idea? It's not as simple as just throw them into a big city and they figure it out. And that's what, for us, we run 70 events per year in these communities across the country with our staff, and we bring in mentors, like the past president of Telemundo. We bring in the CMO of Virgin into these, small locations. And through that work, we create these sustainable ecosystems after 3 years that continue to produce high value deal flow, as well as lift the communities and drive new forms of education and rapid learning. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about on what's next with Bay Bridge Ventures, but, I know I can speak for myself. Honored and excited to be a part of the fund and to help, drive meaningful deal flow from kind of the undiscovered America and undiscovered locations around the world. But, however, we can help, we're in. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate all that, Nick. I mean, especially, just for a perfect example, it was surprising to me when we, have been talking, you mentioned that, there's a company called Rohini that came out of your original innovation hub in Idaho that now created some amazing,
they have incredible
LED microchip that, by the way,
yeah,
is in the iPad.
Yeah. So they're creating the future. What we can touch on, it's the world's fastest semiconductors.
Right.
But at the end of the day,
my point is that it's innovations like that, that are coming out of areas that people don't predict. And so, when I think about venture and philanthropy, it's really about, how do you invest in founders and companies that are an untapped resource? Because typically, again, if you're not competing with 10 other venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road for the deal, A, you're going to get a better valuation, but B, it's really, you're making a much larger impact on the lives of people around that organization and the community that they come from, right? So, when I think about that, it's really about, making significant change, scalable fund. We've already been talking with some of the largest LPs in the world. We're super excited about, one of the CIOs said to me, please save us a spot. This is the first thing we've ever seen that's actually making the changes that we've committed to our board, but also, generating significant returns. And clearly, the benefit of having all these amazing people on the call is, we're right now trying to close out this $5 million anchor round, really with the goal to have like-minded investors and philanthropists involved, be part of our advisory committee, and also part of our grant committee on an active basis, alongside people like Freda and Ann, who are really, amazing supporters of the cause. And so, as we do that, we'll be reaching out, and feel free to reach out to myself or Nick, and we can get more information to you about, how we're doing that, the timing, and sort of our execution plan. But it's really about, sort of monetizing all the things we've been talking about today in a large scalable fund, so we can make the kind of change that everybody's looking for.
Yeah, and from a the large scalable fund perspective, just to clarify too, large institutional funds getting access to the top tier deals coming out of the Bay, getting access to our grassroots network of lower valuation, top tier deals that we can work with the largest companies in the world. We have a lot of Fortune 100s. We report into their chief innovation officers on what we're seeing and do JVs and partnerships. And then the returns from that, the LPs get their full returns. The GPs get only 50% of their 20%. The other 50% gets put back on the table that the LP is going to go, and here you go, world, and push it back into research, push it back into impact, into any kind of nonprofit, and then they get the taxable benefits from that, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So,
awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, as we talk to more people, the support we're getting has been fantastic. I think people have been looking for something different, something that, as opposed to having to evaluate, funds that are looking at, okay, well, we think this is impact or it's not, or, trying to prove their carbon footprint. This is, it's clear from our investment profile, what we're investing in is impactful. And then of course, the beneficial result is a large pool of capital that, again, similar to the people on this call who are like-minded philanthropists, is really going straight to the bottom line of sort of helping the next generation of, scientists, innovators, entrepreneurs who are really kind of changing the way society is going to be for a long time.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you a part of that and mentoring our communities and the networks. So, I don't know, is there anything else that you want to share, or are we good to go?
Yeah, no, I think this has been fantastic. Really want to thank everybody for joining today. And of course, thank Freda, Morel, and Anne for their amazing insights. It's they're people that I've known for long enough to know how amazing they are, but it's very rare that they speak at public events like this or private public events like this. So, I'm just sort of very pleased that you all got to see kind of the amazing thoughts, that they're doing and they're executing on a daily basis, both in terms of their individual funds and obviously Anne and, at the largest pension fund in the country. So, I hope you've all, learned and sort of been as amazed as I have by the conversation today, and look forward to speaking with you all about the work we're doing going forward.
Yeah, and we'll see everyone at future events that are BBVIC events that we'll be putting on, and make sure people get invites to those, and they'll be hearing from us as follow-up. So thanks so much, Andrew.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye now.